Welcome back to Cablevision's Meet the Leaders, here with New York State Assemblyman Al Graf from the 5th Assembly District in the town of Islip. Assemblyman, this is your first legislative district. Some
Yes.
people, legislative session. Some people say this was the most successful legislative session in many, many years. You had a new governor, a lot of new members of the Assembly. The Republicans, their ranks grew by a lot. As you pointed out when you were running, you sensed that there was enormous dissatisfaction with the status quo and people wanted change. So let's talk about some of the changes. This year, because the state is broke, the legislature passed an education budget that provided significantly less money to our school districts. And the governor made an argument that we've just seen big increases in state aid over the years, yet we're not getting what we're paying for, and it's time for these school districts to make do with what the state can afford. You voted against that budget. Why?
I was one of two people that voted against it. The reason I voted against it, one, Long Island schools were getting hit disproportionately. Two, they did nothing with mandate relief.
But the state senators from Long Island said we did the best we could, and when we looked at the shares, the percentages of the education budget that go to each region, they said Long Island did basically as well as it could have hoped for.
I don't think so. I think we were holding the cards in this legislative session. All right, there were a lot of things we could have pushed a little harder. Look, you're going to get a lot of assemblymen on here and senators here that will tell you that everything was sunshine, rainbows, and puppies. All right, that's not me. All right. Look, I look at things, let's get something done, now let's move on to the next thing. And there were a lot of things that were left on the table.
But what about the argument that while the governor and legislators talked about mandate relief, most people would agree with what you've just said, which is that they really didn't provide the mandate relief that school districts and other jurisdictions need if they're going to try to do this with less money from the state.
Look, I put in a series of legislative bills that I've been pushing and pushing to help relieve not only the schools, but the local governments. One, I'm going to give you an example. There was a RAIN program years ago, and that was the first Governor Cuomo's little project there. And basically all it was a website. And what that website did is it listed every grant that was out there, whether it was a federal, state, or private grant.
Right.
And there's a lot of money out there. Right now, in the state, I wanted the state to actually put this website up and to make sure it was updated. I used it when I was a town supervisor.
I was going to say, it sounds like you utilize that all the time.
I was like a kid that got the Christmas catalog from Sears when we were younger. I would go out there, find any grants I could. For an example, I needed emergency shoulders for my roads when I was upstate. Small town, we don't have that much money, so I had to get creative. I found a grant for bicycle paths. And my approach was, look, if you're willing to pay for it, I'll let you call it whatever you want.
That's right.
So one person's bicycle path is another person's emergency shoulder. You have to get creative.
So how much,
in government.
did you get some money for that?
Oh yeah, I got it in there. We used in-kind service from the town, so it didn't cost the local taxpayers anything. There are a lot of grants I went after, and this was just a simple website, right? But you know how it is, Pat. You've been in the Assembly. This is so partisan up there. It's
too
unreal.
partisan.
If you don't have a Republican in the Senate to push forward a bill, it's not going anywhere.
But the Republicans in the Assembly said that many of the ideas that that Andrew Cuomo, the new governor, put forward were actually ideas that they've been promoting for some time.
Well, I can agree with that, but I'm just talking about the mechanics of Albany. And the other thing is, if you're not a Democrat in the Assembly, it's going to be hard. I wound up with, I put in 10 bills this year, I wound up getting 4 passed.
That's pretty good.
I have the highest percentage. But one thing I did learn was what I have to do is I have to write the bill, I have to pitch the Senate, get myself a Republican sponsor in the Senate. Then what I do is I go to the Democratic side and I pitch them. And when I get a Democrat that likes the bill, I hand it to him. I go, here, it's yours, put it in. Because all I care about is the legislation.
It's getting the result.
Right. Harry Truman had a great saying that I love. It's amazing how much you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. So there are certain things that I want passed that I want to get through, and I'm going to be working hard to make sure.
So let's talk about mandate relief. You said there's this resource, the RAIN program is one that is basically doesn't cost much money, but it can generate literally hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a service.
Right.
What are some of the mandates that you think should be eliminated?
Well, look, every time we turn around, the state orders the schools to do something. Unfunded, people have to understand what unfunded mandates are. And what an unfunded mandate is the state passes a law, right? And then they pass the cost down to the schools.
Well, let me give you an example of a proposal that I think is well intended. As you know, kids were getting skin diseases from wrestling mats.
Right.
And a state senator from Long Island proposed a bill to mandate that they clean the mats.
Right.
My reaction to that is, why do they have to mandate to clean the wrestling mats?
Right.
They should be doing that anyway. It's a good practice, but you know what happens with a mandate. Next, you're going to have a report. Next, you're going to have to document every time it's done, and it becomes part of the bureaucracy as opposed to just a simple best practice. Clean the mats.
And it's a cost.
And it's a cost.
Every time I sit in these committee meetings, and time after time, I ask, who's going to pay for this? How much is this going to cost?
Good questions.
Their favorite answer, oh, the cost is to be determined.
Right.
And I look at them, and most of the time my reaction is, are you out of your mind? Would you sign a mortgage with the cost to be determined? Would you buy a car with the cost to be determined? Look, you have to know what the cost is. And a lot of times what happens is the city will sit there and say, this is a wonderful bill for the city. And my response to that is, you have to understand that everything is good for the city, that's good for the city of New York is not necessarily good for the rest of the state. So it's a constant fight between the suburban areas and the city to say, knock it off. And this year's session, what I can say is we had a lot of fights on the floors. We had a lot of fights in committees, and we actually got bills pulled out of committee.
Which is the way it should be.
Right.
Things shouldn't just be rubber stamped.
Right. So, I mean, it's a different type, it's a different setting up there now.
What about the property tax cap? That is a proposal that had been around for some time. The Senate had passed it a number of years ago.
Right.
Ken LaValle had proposed that. It finally got approved this go round. And if you talk to school officials, you know, they'll tell you it's going to destroy public education. What's your response to that?
Well, my response to that, look, the final tax cap, it was watered down quite a bit. And what they're doing is asking the schools to live within their budget like everybody else will do. Over the years, and I've said to the schools, I said, look, you kept dipping the bucket in the same well.
That's
and
right.
It's been coming out overflowing. Now it's coming out empty. You have to find a new well. You have to find new resources. There is other money. You know, it's easy to just walk up to the state and say, give me this. But it's another thing to actually put in the work and say, look, I can get $1 million here for my music program. I can go for some of my athletic programs. I can look at math grants that are out there because people are pushing math.
Right.
There's money out there. So what we have to do is retrain our schools to find other resources besides the taxpayer's pocket all the time. Look, you got to get creative. Business has to get creative. And
Look,
you have
were a
to
manager
change.
at Wells Fargo. You
Right.
saw they looked at the bottom line all the time. What's the benefit? What's the cost?
Right. And that's what's happening with the schools. Look, you know, I have a teaching degree. I have a degree in elementary education. I've taught in the classroom. And I know how important education is. But I also realize that times are changing. You have people fleeing Long Island. You have people fleeing New York State. You have businesses fleeing New York State. Look, we're the most overtaxed state in the union. The MTA tax, we're going to talk about that later.
We're going to take a short break, but before we do, you know, you're a teacher.
Right.
There's two things that translate to great education. A great building principal who's a good leader and an excellent teacher in a classroom. Everything else should support that.
Right.
And it's a cost, but those are the two things that are essential. So stay with us. We'll have more with Assemblyman Graf. Meet the Leaders will be back in just a minute.